Hello friends across Mennonite Church, Alberta. I'm Tany Warkentin, and I'm the pastoral leader at Spring Ridge Mennonite Church in Pincher Creek. And I've also gotten to know some of you through my role as treasurer of our Mennonite Church Alberta churches. Last month, MCA posted a video of Caleb Qualco speaking on Encountering the Other, a sermon that he would have shared at our annual delegate sessions had they been able to take place in March. I was to be another of the speakers at that meeting, so this video is my reflection, also a part of the E3 renewal process that our MCA churches are involved in, encountering, embracing, and embodying Christ. And this year, we focus on how we do this in our personal lives. Let's take a moment to center ourselves in prayer. God, thank you that you are continuously reaching out to us, revealing yourself to us, speaking to us, and working in good and healing ways. Open our eyes to see you, open our ears to be attentive and to hear you, and open our hearts so that you can move in us and through us. Amen. I'll be reflecting on how we open ourselves to the voice of God when God speaks in a gentle whisper, and I'll share some experiences from my own life. I hope that my reflections cause you to think about how you hear God's voice, and perhaps encourage you in this lifelong journey as we seek to listen attentively to God and respond with obedience. How do we open ourselves to the voice of God when God speaks in a gentle whisper? Hearing God in a gentle whisper refers to the well-known Bible story found in 1 Kings 19, starting with verse 11. It's the story of Elijah when he's on Mount Horeb. He's inside a cave and he's waiting for God to pass by. First, there's a strong wind, a mountain-splitting wind strong enough to break rocks. But God isn't in the wind. Then Elijah hears an earthquake and a fire, but God isn't there. Elijah keeps listening and waiting until he hears the sound of sheer silence. In the NIV version says, the sound of a gentle whisper, and it's then that he recognizes God's voice. I like to think that when God speaks to me in loud and obvious ways, in mountain-splitting kind of ways, that I take notice and hear God speaking. But when God speaks to me in a gentle whisper, or in sheer silence, do I hear God's voice? During this first year of our E3 renewal process, we, as Mennonite Church Alberta churches and individuals, are working at deepening our relationship with God and tuning into God's voice through spiritual disciplines like prayer, spiritual reading and conversations, silence, and contemplative practices. In our quick-moving culture and busy and scheduled lives, it takes real effort to set aside everything that's demanding our time and attention, to quiet ourselves and enter a deeper, more spiritual space, just to be with God. This is what Richard Rohr writes in his book, Just This. Letting go is basically making space for more, and for all otherness inside my small self. Jesus makes this point in his very opening line in his first sermon, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." We do not live in a culture that appreciates letting go of poverty of spirit. We are consumers and capitalists by training and by habit, yet all infilling must be preceded by a necessary self-emptying, or there's no room in the inn. End of quote. Even if we are convinced of the importance of letting go and making room in the inn for God in our lives, how hard is it to stick to our commitments to do so? I find this challenging. It makes sense that we need to intentionally make space and focus in order to listen carefully, and we do it all the time in our daily lives. If I want to really listen to a quiet sound, like birds singing, it takes intentionality and planning. I live on a farm, so I'd go outside, I'd turn off my music and put away my cell phone. I'd need to move away from distracting sounds, like my daughter mowing the lawn, the vehicles passing on the highway, and our cat meowing at my feet. I'd go into the grove of trees behind our house, maybe with a lawn chair so I could sit comfortably, lean back, close my eyes, and then I could focus on the birds singing around me. It takes the right kind of space, free of distractions and other agenda, free from the noise of our everyday lives and our own busy thoughts. And it takes intentional focus for us to listen and hear the quiet voice of God. And often in my life, like with Elijah, instead of showing up in mountain-splitting ways, it seems like God chooses to be revealed in quiet, non-coercive ways. I've worked as a parent coach in my community, and in these early childhood circles, there's a lot of attention given to what they call the strength-based approach. In the strength-based approach, if someone wants to improve themselves or develop a good habit, you look for areas where they are already doing something well, or at least making some efforts, and you encourage them to lean into that area to do it even better and more regularly. You build on their strengths rather than ask them to start a new foreign habit or skill from scratch. We tend to have an easier time committing to and sticking with routines and practices in areas of our lives where we are already naturally drawn or have experience. And I think this same concept applies to how we open ourselves to hear God's gentle whisper. Think of moments in your life when you are naturally more attentive to God being with you. Maybe your thoughts are more drawn to God when you are listening to a certain kind of music, taking a walk, enjoying a favorite hobby, or driving a car. Maybe you are more aware of God with you when you experience beauty in nature, or when you're with certain people. A strength-based approach would suggest that by embracing those moments when you already naturally tune into God's Spirit and making them a regular part of your routines, you'll have a much higher success rate in forming a habit that you can stick with and which opens you to hear God. When we reach out to God in these moments, we realize that God's hand was already there, extended towards us in love, just waiting for us to notice and take hold. God was already speaking, even if not always with words, just waiting for us to listen. I naturally tune into God being with me in the moments right after I wake up. In the mornings, I wake up and immediately jump out of bed to get a start on my day, so I don't take the time to just be. But I'm also a dedicated afternoon nap taker, and often it's when I'm waking up from my afternoon nap that my mind is naturally attentive to God's presence and nudgings. It's before I turn my thoughts back on to thinking about what I need to get done that day or to what's on my to-do list. It's before I allow my mind to start being productive, when thoughts are free to float here and there without needing me to control and direct them. And in those moments, I have a clear sense that God is with me, present and moving in my thoughts, even stirring my thoughts around a bit. It's during these moments that I get my best ideas, and I'm sure there are psychological explanations for this as well, but I feel God present and speaking to me in these waking moments. When I've been asking God for guidance on a decision I need to make, it's in these moments that I tend to feel God's affirmation to move ahead or to wait. These waking moments before my mind becomes distracted with productivity and activity allow the space and quiet for God to speak when I am tuned in to hear. As you reflect on when you naturally are more tuned into God, are there ways that you could lean further into those moments to make them happen more often or become a part of your regular routine? When we make the space in our lives for these moments of tuning into God, we train ourselves to recognize and hear God speaking. In other times when I've heard God speaking to me in quiet and subtle ways, I notice that it was often when I came with this posture or attitude of letting go, of surrendering my attachment to my own desires, expectations, and independence. And this is a stance we've actually talked quite a lot about in the last couple of years as MCA entered this renewal process. We've used the image of open hands to talk about what we need to release as we discern God's direction, and how in order to attach deeply to God's Spirit within us, we need to let go of attachments in other aspects of our lives. When I come with an open-handed posture, it's this surrender that has allowed me to notice God at work and hear God's gentle guiding. Several years ago, I served as the short-term ministry coordinator for our nationwide churches of Mennonite Church Canada, coordinating ministries where we sent out short-term workers to different countries for terms up to 1 year to support the ministries of our international partners or our long-term witness workers in countries where we had them. It didn't take very long at all in this role for me to notice a certain characteristic in our short-term ministry workers that had a huge impact on whether their experience was a positive and transformative one for themselves and our partners. This characteristic was how tightly they held on to their own expectations, plans, and desires as they served. God calls each of us to give ourselves to others and serve others. But how often do we do so with a sense of having already decided how we are going to serve, who we will serve, or who we won't serve, and for how long? After all, we are the ones offering our gifts, time, and often money, so shouldn't that give us the right to decide how these gifts are used? And yet, this tight-fisted posture in us drowns out God's voice, guiding us in ways that are often surprising, but if we listen and obey, that have the power to transform us and those we serve. Almost all of the short-term ministry workers that I worked with were able to hold their expectations loosely, knowing that even well-laid plans change, and that allowed them to be flexible to adjust and respond to God's gentle direction and redirection, and to be responsive to the needs of our partners. And this posture of holding our own expectations and desires with open hands led them to serve well, to serve respectfully, and to learn and grow from the friendships they made. There have also been times in my life when I've asked God for direction and I haven't heard God's voice at all. These times have required me to let go of my independent spirit and open myself to invite others to help me discern God's will. And God has often spoken to me through other people. Early in our life together, my late husband Jeff and I applied to serve internationally with both Mennonite Central Committee and Mennonite Church Canada. I had felt this pull towards serving in Africa in some way ever since I was a young child, after my parents were MCC workers there. And Jeff and I together felt a calling towards ministry in Africa, even though we were trying really hard to hold loosely our own preferences in case God called us to a non-African country. But there were no openings for a number of years after we applied. When we got our first phone call from Mennonite Church Canada, we already had 2 young children. The opening was for a placement in Botswana, looking for someone to mentor teachers in how to become better teachers. Jeff had his education degree, but he had only taught for 2 years as a substitute teacher. So you can understand our questioning whether with so little experience we were the best fit for this role. We asked God for some indication whether this was the direction we were being called, but we didn't hear any response, not even a gentle whisper. We had no idea what God wanted us to do. We already knew the MC Canada staff quite well, and they knew us. We trusted them and knew they understood the needs in Botswana, so we told them that we were open to their discerning whether we were the best fit for this placement. In the end, at the same time, the Mennonite Church in Burkina Faso in West Africa asked for someone to come help lead a church there and support leadership training in the young adults who made up most of that church. And so together with the MC Canada staff, we felt God calling us to Burkina Faso. But it was when we opened ourselves to include others in our discernment that we felt God speak, not directly to us, but through others. Another time this happened was after we'd completed our first 3-year term in Burkina Faso, and we wondered whether we should continue for another term or return to Canada. By helping the young adults in our church develop as church leaders, our goal was to eventually work ourselves out of the leadership roles that we filled. So as the young people took on more and more leadership, the need for us was already starting to decrease. Also, Jeff and I tried to keep an open door way of living in Burkina, similar to how the Burkinabe lived, where our friends and neighbors were always welcome to come visit and stay for meals, and some even stayed for a good chunk of the day. And while we wouldn't have changed that because it made for great relationships and opportunities to share, it was slowly wearing down our energy levels and wasn't sustainable in the long term. So we wondered if it was the right time for us to move back to Canada. Again, we asked God for direction, but heard nothing. We weren't sure what God wanted us to do. So we went to some of the Burkinabe leaders of the National Church for advice. Now, there's a tradition in Burkina Faso that when you go to visit someone, you are honoring them with your visit, but then it's up to the host to decide when your visit is over and when you are allowed to go back home. So the visitor needs to ask for the road, which is asking for permission to leave, and then wait until the host is ready to give them the road before saying goodbye. So in the same way, when we went to the Burkinabe church leaders to ask for their advice on the right time to return to Canada, we were essentially asking them for the road. After some time of prayer-filled discernment, they told us that our work in Burkina wasn't done and that we should stay for another term. And Jeff and I felt God speaking through these leaders, and we stayed. Opening ourselves to be attentive and to hear God's voice is a lifelong journey for each of us. As you continue on this journey, I leave you with these blessings. May you have the courage and commitment to develop spiritual practices in your daily life, creating space for you to tune into God and be more attentive to God's voice. May you have the humility and wisdom to let go of your own desires, expectations, and attachments, to allow God to guide you into surprising and transforming opportunities. And may you open yourself to hear God speaking to you through the wise and godly people around you. Peace be with you.